Angelisis, Rebirth. Copyright 2025 by Ricardo Alanis. All rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or by any means, including photocopying, recording, or other electronic or mechanical methods, without the prior written permission of the publisher, except as permitted by U.S. copyright law. The story, all names, characters, and incidents portrayed in this production are fictitious. No identification with actual persons, living or deceased, places, buildings, and products is intended or should be inferred. Chapter 4, Legacy Awakens. The fluorescent lights of St. Michael Private University's examination hall flicker overhead, casting intermittent shadows across rows of hunched students. Grace Horlin stares at the archaeology test paper before her, the questions swimming like eels beneath murky water. Her trembling fingers leave damp prints on the corner of the page as she twists a strand of unwashed hair around her index finger, a nervous habit she's never been able to break. 2 weeks since the funeral, and the world still feels impossibly fragile, as if everything might shatter at the slightest touch. Professor Ambers paces at the front of the room, his light green eyes occasionally catching hers with what she swears is pity. Brian would be disappointed if he could see her now, his always composed, always prepared older sister falling apart over a test. But Brian has his own problems Grace can barely comprehend despite their closeness. Her parents, John and Jenna, had called yesterday, their voices strained as they asked about her well-being while carefully avoiding any mention of the exam. Grace blinks hard, forcing herself to focus on the paper. The dark circles under her eyes feel like bruises, tender to the touch when she rubs them. Question 7 swims into focus. She knows the answer, or she should, but her mind is a blank slate, wiped clean by grief and exhaustion. 20 minutes remaining, Professor Ambers announces, his voice carrying that strange, breathy quality that somehow manages to be both soft and perfectly audible. Rain, sitting 3 rows ahead, straightens her shoulders and continues writing with confident strokes. Grace watches the back of her head, the dark brown hair neatly tied back, revealing the nape of her neck. Even from here, Grace can see the scar, a thin white line running from her hairline down beneath her collar, a memento from some battle Grace isn't supposed to know about. The crush she's harbored since freshman year feels ridiculous now, a trivial concern against the backdrop of death. Her hand moves unconsciously to her throat, fingers closing around the talisman her grandparents left her. The stone is warm to the touch, unnaturally so, as if it holds a piece of summer within its carved surface. The symbols etched into it seem to shift when she's not looking directly at them, rearranging themselves like ants in a colony. Grace had assumed it was just a family heirloom, something to remember them by. Now, she's not so sure. Toby would call it magic without hesitation. Her little brother's certainty about the fantastical is something she both envies and dismisses. But as the stone pulses against her palm in time with her heartbeat, Grace wonders if perhaps she's been too quick to embrace skepticism. The paper remains obstinately blank before her. Failure looms like a physical presence over her shoulder, breath hot against her neck. She hasn't slept properly since finding them, her grandparents, arranged too neatly in their living room, faces peaceful, in a way that belied the violence the police reports hinted at but never fully disclosed. Natural causes, they'd said, but Grace had seen the faint marks on their throats. The talisman pulses again, more insistent now, Use me, it seems to say, though not in words, in sensations, in possibilities. Grace's breath catches. She's never cheated, not once, in her academic career. But then, she's never buried her grandparents while drowning in unanswered questions either. Her decision crystallizes in an instant of weakness and desperation. She closes her eyes, fingers tightening around the talisman, silently asking it for help in a prayer she doesn't believe in. The response is immediate and overwhelming. Voices flood her consciousness, dozens of them overlapping. A current of thoughts rushing through her mind with such force that she nearly gasps aloud. She can hear them, her classmates, their knowledge and uncertainty flowing into her like water into parched earth. Clearly a reference to the star alignment ceremonies of the Third Dynasty. Trick question. The chambers were actually oriented toward the underworld, not the heavens. Professor Ambers said this would be on the test. Why didn't I study more? Grace's free hand moves across her paper, transcribing answers she shouldn't know. Her heart hammers against her ribs, a desperate prisoner seeking escape. The talisman grows hotter in her grip, almost painful now. But she can't let go. The knowledge is too intoxicating, too perfect. 10 minutes? Ambers calls, and his voice cuts through the mental cacophony for a brief moment. Grace feels something wet on her upper lip and realizes her nose is bleeding. A drop falls onto her paper, blotting out a word. She wipes it quickly with her sleeve, leaving a crimson smear across her wrist. The energy drain is unexpected and alarming. Each thought she captures seems to cost her something vital, as if the talisman feeds on her life force to power its abilities. Her legs feel leaden, muscles trembling with fatigue she shouldn't feel from simply sitting an exam. Yet she continues writing, unable to stop now that she's started. Question after question falls before borrowed knowledge, her paper filling with insights she never earned. A student coughs 3 rows back, a quiet exchange student. Grace flinches at the sound, certain everyone can see what she's doing, that the talisman's subtle glow is a beacon announcing her transgression. But when she glances up, no one is looking her way, no one except Professor Ambers, whose gaze lingers on her with an unreadable expression before moving on. Grace forces herself to loosen her grip on the talisman, letting it fall back against her chest. The voices recede like a tide, leaving her mind blissfully empty, but echoing with absence. She stares at her completed test paper with a mixture of triumph and shame that twists her stomach into knots. The answers are perfect. She knows this with unshakable certainty, but they aren't hers. Time's up, Professor Ambers announces, clapping his hands once. Please bring your papers forward. Grace rises on unsteady feet, the room tilting sideways before righting itself. Her body feels hollow, used up, as if she's run a marathon rather than taken a test. She joins the shuffle of students moving toward the front, her paper clutched in hands that no longer tremble with anxiety, but with bone-deep exhaustion. As she places her test on the growing stack, Professor Amber's fingers brush against hers. An electric current seems to pass between them, and his eyes widen fractionally. Ms. Horlin, he says softly, are you feeling well? Just tired, she manages, the lie tasting sour in her tongue. He nods slowly, but his gaze drops to the talisman visible at her collar. Something like recognition flickers across his face, quickly masked by his usual gentle expression. Get some rest, he advises, but the words carry a weight that suggests he means something far more significant. Grace turns away, relief at finishing the test mingling with dread of what she's done and what it might cost her. The talisman rests cool against her skin once more, innocent as any piece of jewelry. But she knows better now. Whatever power it holds, whatever connection to her grandparents it represents, it's far more dangerous than she imagined, and far more tempting to use again. Grace makes it halfway across the quad before her phone buzzes. The screen displays a message from the archaeology department. Professor Ambers requests your presence in his office immediately. Her stomach plummets. The talisman seems to grow heavier against her chest, as if acknowledging its role in her current predicament. She changes direction, each step toward the anthropology building feeling like a march toward judgment. The late afternoon sun stretches her shadow into something unnaturally tall and thin across the manicured grass. The elevator ride to the third floor gives her just enough time to construct and discard a dozen different excuses. None of them would fool a first-year student, let alone a professor with eyes that seemed to look straight through her. When she reaches his door, oak with a frosted glass panel bearing his name in gold lettering, she pauses, swallowing hard before knocking. Enter, comes his soft, breathy voice from within. Professor Amber's office is a controlled explosion of academic chaos. Books tower in precarious stacks that defy physics, their spines bearing titles in languages Grace recognizes, and many she doesn't. Glass display cases line one wall, housing artifacts that belong in museums, clay tablets covered in cuneiform, bronze daggers with jeweled hilts, ceremonial masks with hollow eyes that seem to follow her movement. Maps blanket another wall, overlapping like scales, some yellowed with age, others crisp and new, all marked with symbols that don't appear in any atlas Grace has studied. The professor himself sits behind a massive desk carved from a single piece of dark wood. The surface is barely visible beneath scrolls, reference books, and what appears to be a human skull repurposed as a paperweight. His light green eyes catch the late afternoon light filtering through Venetian blinds, giving them an almost luminous quality. "Ms. Horlin," he says, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. "Please sit." Grace lowers herself into the chair, her exhaustion from the talisman's use making her movements clumsy. Up close, she notices something odd about Professor Amber's skin. It seems too soft, too perfect for a man his age, as if crafted rather than grown. "I believe we need to discuss your examination performance," he begins, his voice gentle, despite the accusation it carries. "I can explain," she starts, though she absolutely cannot. He raises a hand, silencing her. "I'm less interested in how you cheated than in what you used to do so." His gaze drops to the talisman, visible at her collar. "May I see it?" The directness of the request catches her off guard. Her hand moves protectively to the pendant. It's just a family heirloom. "It is considerably more than that, Ms. Horlin," Professor Ambers says, leaning forward. The movement causes something to shift beneath his perfectly tailored jacket, a subtle reshaping of his shoulders that seems impossible. "That pendant is what we call a mind reader? Where did you get it?" The question feels like a test, one far more important than the archaeology exam. "My grandparents left it to me when they died, last week." Her voice catches on the final words. Something in his expression softens. "Tom and Rachel Horlin. I was sorry to hear of their passing." Grace's breath stops in her throat. "You knew my grandparents?" "We were colleagues of a sort. Professor Ambers rises, moving to close the blinds fully before returning to his seat. The office dims, shadows gathering in the corners like conspirators. Your grandparents were prime warriors, Miss Horlin, as were your parents, before they attempted to leave that life behind. The words hit her like physical blows. Prime warriors. The term means nothing and everything at once. Unfamiliar, yet resonating with a truth she's always sensed, lurking just beyond conscious thought. Prime warriors are members of an ancient order dedicated to protecting humanity from supernatural threats, he continues, his gaze never leaving her face. Vampires, rogue witches, entities that exist beyond ordinary perception. Your family has been part of this legacy for generations. Grace's mind reels, fragments of memories suddenly realigning. Her father's unexplained scars, her mother's insistence on silver cutlery, the strange combat training disguised as self-defense lessons. You're saying my grandparents were monster hunters? The words sound ridiculous leaving her mouth. A crude, but essentially accurate description. His fingers tap a rhythm on his desk that doesn't quite match any natural tempo. They were killed on a mission, Grace, not by the heart attacks described in the official report. Anger flares hot and sudden in her chest. And no one thought I deserved to know the truth? My own parents lied to me about how my grandparents died? Your parents chose to shield you and your brothers from this world, Professor Ambers explains. His lips, fuller than seems natural for his thin face, pressed together in apparent sympathy. A fleeting expression crosses the professor's face, something like guilt mixed with calculation. It's not my story to tell, but know that your parents have tried to protect all of you in their own way. Grace's hands clench into fists on her lap. The talisman pulses against her skin, responding to her agitation. Protection through ignorance isn't protection at all. Perhaps not, he concedes, but their intentions were pure. And this, she lifts the talisman, letting it dangle from her fingers. What exactly is it? Professor Ambers' eyes track the pendant's movement with an intensity that feels predatory. A tool and a weapon. It allows its wearer to access the thoughts of others, as you discovered today. But it also marks you, makes you visible to entities that normally cannot perceive human consciousness. Visible to what? Grace asks, a chill spreading through her despite the office's warmth. Instead of answering directly, he opens a drawer and removes a slip of paper. His handwriting flows across it in elegant curves that seem too perfect, too practiced. If you want real answers about your grandparents, about the talisman, about the world your family has hidden from you, go to this address tonight, after dark. Grace takes the paper, reading the location. Basement-level coordinates on campus that don't correspond to any building she knows. What's there? The entrance to St. Michael's true purpose, he says, cryptically. His eyes, catching the last light filtering through the blinds, flash with an unnatural brightness. But I must warn you, Grace. Once you cross that threshold, there's no going back to the life you knew. As if in response to his words, the pendant grows warm against her palm. Grace stares at it, noticing for the first time how the etched symbols seem to pulse with an inner light, matching the rhythm of her heartbeat. You have a choice, now, that your parents never gave you, Professor Ambers continues. You can put that pendant away, pretend this conversation never happened, return to your studies and your normal life. Or you can seek the truth, with all its dangers and responsibilities. Grace slips the paper into her pocket, decision already crystallizing in her mind. My grandparents wouldn't have left this to me if they didn't think I was ready for whatever it means. Professor Amber's expression grows solemn. He glances at the skull on his desk, and for a brief moment, Grace could swear the empty eye sockets gleam with recognition. Be careful, Miss Horlin. That pendant makes you visible to things that hunt in darkness, things that have been waiting a very long time for someone like you. Campus after dark is a different creature altogether. The academic buildings lose their welcoming daytime facades, windows becoming vacant eyes staring out into nothing. Grace checks the coordinates on her phone again, breath clouding in the unexpected chill that's descended since sunset. The location Professor Ambers gave her corresponds to a patch of ground between the Ancient Studies building and the university library, a space that, according to the campus map, shouldn't exist at all. Yet as she approaches, flashlight beam cutting through evening mist, she can make out a narrow passage between the two structures, one she's walked past hundreds of times without noticing. Her fingers touch the talisman for reassurance, finding it unnaturally warm despite the evening's cold. Since the conversation with Professor Ambers, she hasn't been able to stop thinking about her family's secret life. Her parents, John and Jenna Horlin, monster hunters who decided their children should live in ignorance. Her little brother Toby, who at 6 years old might already sense something unusual in their household. And Brian, somehow central to their parents' decision to shield them all, though she still doesn't understand why. The passage narrows as she proceeds, brick walls on either side leaning inward as if conspiring to trap her. Her flashlight beam weakens, the batteries draining faster than should be possible. Up ahead, the path ends at a blank wall of aged stone, unmarked except for a faint discoloration that might once have been graffiti. This can't be right, Grace mutters, checking the coordinates again. The GPS insists she's exactly where she should be, yet there's nothing here, no door, no sign, nothing to indicate this is anything but a dead end. Frustration rises like bile in her throat. After the revelations of the day, after learning her entire life has been constructed on lies, to be stopped by a literal wall is too much. She slams her palm against the stone, wincing at the impact. Open. Damn you, she hisses, immediately feeling foolish for talking to a wall. The stone remains impassive, cold beneath her touch. Grace runs her fingers along its surface, searching for seams or hidden mechanisms. Nothing, just solid, unyielding stone that seems to mock her determination. She checks the paper again, wondering if she's misinterpreted the location or if Professor Ambers has sent her on a fool's errand. As her irritation peaks, the talisman at her throat pulses with sudden heat. Grace gasps, pulling it away from her skin before it can burn her. The carved stone glows with an inner light, symbols shifting and reorganizing themselves like living things. Without conscious thought, she holds it toward the wall, watching. As the light intensifies, casting eerie shadows that seem to move independently of her hand's motion. Where the talisman's light touches the wall, something changes. The stone seems to ripple, its solid surface becoming momentarily fluid. A small blue circle materializes at eye level, an elevator button, modern and sleek, utterly incongruous against the ancient stonework. Grace stares, mind struggling to process what she's seeing. The rational part of her brain searches for projectors, hidden technology, anything to explain this impossibility. But the weight of the day's revelations tips the scale toward acceptance. If her grandparents were supernatural hunters, If her talisman can read minds, then why not a door appearing from nothing? Her finger hovers over the button, hesitation battling curiosity. Professor Amber's warning echoes in her mind. Once you cross that threshold, there's no going back to the life you knew. But the alternative, returning to a life built on lies, pretending she doesn't know what she now knows, seems impossible. The talisman pulses again, almost encouraging. Grace presses the button. The wall slides open with a soft hydraulic hiss, revealing an elevator interior that belongs in a science fiction film rather than a centuries-old university. Brushed steel walls reflect her startled expression back at her. The floor is transparent, showing mechanical components moving beneath her feet with precision that suggests something beyond ordinary engineering. Instead of numbered buttons, the control panel displays symbols similar to those etched on her talisman. She steps inside, half expecting the door to slam shut behind her, trapping her. Instead, it closes with gentle deliberation, sealing her in with a whisper of air. For a moment, nothing happens. The elevator remains motionless, silent, except for Grace's increasingly rapid breathing. Then, without her touching anything, the elevator begins to move. Not down, as she expected, but sideways, sliding along a horizontal track she hadn't noticed. The sensation is disorienting, her body still anticipating the familiar pull of descent. "What the hell?" she whispers, grabbing the handrail as the elevator picks up speed. The movement shifts again, now upward, directly contradicting the basement level coordinates. Grace's stomach lurches with the unexpected change in direction. The elevator rotates on its axis, the floor becoming a wall, the ceiling becoming the floor. Grace clings to the handrail, now beneath her rather than beside her, as gravity shifts with the elevator's orientation. Her hair hangs upward, defying physics, while her body remains firmly pressed against what was once the wall. "Stop," she gasps. But the elevator continues its impossible journey, spinning faster now, the glimpses outside becoming a blur of light and shadow. Then, without warning, everything stops. The elevator hangs motionless, in space, for 3 heartbeats, and plummets. The free fall is total and terrifying. Grace's body lifts from the surface she was pressed against, floating in the small space, as the elevator drops at a speed that forces the breath from her lungs. Her scream echoes in the enclosed chamber, bouncing back at her with a distorted quality that makes it sound like someone else's voice. Through the transparent walls, darkness rushes past, occasionally broken by flashes of light from unknown sources. Each flash illuminates strange architectures, massive chambers carved from living rock, bridges spanning abysses too deep to fathom, and always, moving through these spaces, figures that don't move quite right, don't look quite human. Grace's mind struggles to process what she's seeing, to maintain some grip on reality, as all physical laws seem to abandon her. The elevator continues its plunge, gathering speed until the rushing air within the cabin drowns out even her screams. Her body presses against the ceiling. Or is it the floor again? The pressure increasing until breathing becomes difficult.